Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields and Bourbon podcast. I'm Jack, joined as always by my co-host Elijah. And he's back, Aaron Siever, Mr. Aaron Civil War Travels. He is back in the building.
He lives here.
He lives here. We tried to lock him out. He just teleported in. So he is here. We're coming to you from the historic Bell House in beautiful downtown Winchester, Virginia, which is preserved and maintained by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, the managing body of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, and the official podcast sponsor of the Battlefields and Bourbon podcast where we sit and sip, talk all things Civil War history and American bourbon whiskey. But before we get into today's episode topic, which is the impact of certain Confederate leadership in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, Elijah, talk about our bourbon this episode.
Jim Beam Black Extra Aged. So this is, as you can imagine, readily available, easy to find bourbon. So we're kind of giving you guys something that everybody can relate to, everybody can find. It is ranked by the International Wine and Spirits Competition as world's highest rated bourbon. We'll find out about that here in a minute. But as far as mash bills go, this one is 75% corn, 13% rye, and 12% malted barley, bottled at 86 proof. Now, Jim Beam calls it extra aged. I believe at one point they said that it was an 8-year. It may have had that age statement on the label. Now they don't have that anymore. But this expression goes back a little ways here. But as far as I'm aware, I know Jim Beam, generally for their regular stuff, it just says that it's aged a minimum of 2 years. So I'm not sure if extra age just means double that. So if we're looking at a 4-year bourbon, not sure. But it is dark for what it is. So that should lend to the age of it. And unfortunately for our listeners, there is no cork pop tonight. This is just a plastic screw top. So
that's a good screw. That's a good
unscrew.
unscrew.
Unscrewing.
A great unscrew.
I will say, for the sake of the podcast and my imagination, I'm just going to assume this is aged for 8 years.
We'll go off of that because
I'll go off. It's what they used to do. Why would they change it?
Yeah.
They wouldn't change it.
It's not like they can't. I mean, Jim Beam is one of the biggest distilleries in the world. If it isn't,
Nice glass bottle, black label.
Yeah, it's a good looking bottle. I mean, it's a nice classic 1800s look to
it. It makes you feel a little bit better too that it's not a plastic bottle.
Yeah.
Like the fact that that's glass, I might keep it once it's empty. After tonight, it's a tiny little bottle too.
Yeah, this one's a pint size. We didn't get a full size of this one, but I mean.
So what are we getting off the nosing?
It's got typical of Beam products. It's got that nuttiness to it.
I think it's my first Jim Beam product I've ever had.
So if this is a good intro then, because then you'll understand as we go forward in different episodes with other Beam products, they all have this kind of like a nutty, like peanuts almost, as well as a fruity kind of apricot note, to me at least.
I've never had an apricot.
You haven't lived.
I like when you use that one because it's like I can't relate to that. What's the proof on this one?
86. Yeah.
86.
So it's getting up there at that point. Like I said in another episode or other episodes, the minimum for it to be considered bourbon has to be at least 80 proof. So you're above that. And being extra aged, it's going to be mellow anyway. Lower proof will also add to that. So this should be really, really easy to sip on.
Yeah, it's very smooth.
That almost tastes, and this is probably going to sound maybe sacrilegious to some folks that are big Beam fans, but this almost, you can kind of taste that Booker's kind of taste to it, which Booker's, for those of you that don't know, is another Beam product. It is their barrel proof expression of the Beam lineup, and you can pick out a lot of those notes that you would get in Booker's, albeit muted, because it's been watered down from the barrel proof version of that. You get that smoky, woody kind of flavor in there with the fruit, that apricot note, which still translates from the nose to the palate, as well as that nuttiness. Like I said, peanuts are prevalent in this one. But it's kind of impressive how similar that tastes. I'm wondering if that's not the same or close to the same age as Booker's. It's just proof down. Which, if that's the case, that's cool.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It tastes very similar.
It's oaky. It's dark.
Yeah, you can pick that
It's
up
very,
for sure.
very oaky.
A little bit of a burn of the nostrils on the nosing for a second. Something that we weren't used to in the Penelope we tried in a previous episode. Yeah, I mean, it's
I like
okay.
it. Yeah, I mean, I think for a fifth of it, it's like $25.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, a good bourbon for the budget. Obviously, the price is going to indicate that it's not something that you're going to pay top dollar for. That it's going to wow you to the extent that something like Booker's would, where the MSRP on that's anywhere from $90 to $100 to $110. Aged longer, and they do show an age statement with Booker's. They also give you like information on the rick house and the barrels that went into the batch, that sort of thing. Definitely a stark contrast between their premium stuff and then obviously their regular shelf stuff that they mass produce, which is Jim Beam Black, among other things.
I'm getting major tobacco vibes from this, like pipe tobacco.
Yeah. That's definitely
A little Black and Mild cigar.
I've never had a Black and Mild, but
You smelled them, I'm sure.
probably. But no, I get like pipe tobacco, like
It's got
when
an
you-
old-timey feel.
when you mentioned, old timey, almost off the nosing, like a fruity flavored pipe tobacco. More like a, an apple or maybe an apricot. I don't know, whatever that is. But yeah, definitely dark, almost like dirty's not the right word in the taste, but it's not like you're getting a bunch of different flavors as the taste, smooths out in your mouth. I think it's like one punch to your palate, I think. And that's kind of that like smoky oakiness of a. It's like if you lick the inside of a tobacco pipe, like right there in the bowl where there used to be all this tobacco and it's charred up. It's like that. That's what I'm getting from this.
Why do I feel like you have experience with that?
I haven't licked the inside of a tobacco pipe, but it's
really
just
seems
what I
like that.
imagine.
seems awfully defensive.
I've smoked a tobacco pipe
Very
before.
descriptive. I would, I think this kind of, it's good. But it reminds me of, we had Bullet on one of the other episodes, or Brulee, where it's kind of a very easy to get bourbon. Doesn't make it a bad thing. It's just, it does not pack a major punch. It's actually, you could sit and sip this and enjoy it in an evening. It does not have a huge burn.
Did they give a
nosing.
mash bill with this?
Yeah, it was, as I had mentioned it earlier.
Sorry, I wasn't.
No, that's fine. 75%
You were busy
corn,
pouring.
75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted barley. So pretty heavy in the corn.
Yeah.
So that's where you'll get that.
That's maybe why I don't
sweetness.
like. I don't think I'm a big corn guy.
Yeah, you've talked about being a rye guy.
I think I'm a rye guy.
Because you like Bullet, and that's higher rye bourbon. So, that's...
I don't know if I
stark
like Bullet that
difference.
much,
Well,
but
yeah,
I like rye whiskeys. I think
Yeah.
that's my thing.
they have a nice little zip to them.
I love that. What did you say? It's like
Like a menthol spearmint.
no.
kinda zing
When
to
we
it.
smelled the Catoctin stuff, it was almost like wood shavings. Like
a musty, dusty.
I
kinda-
love that musty, dusty
Yeah.
smell, and I don't get that with this. And it's
No, you're definitely, I think you're right. You're probably more of a rye guy.
I want to get shirts made that says rye guy.
Yeah. I'm just a bourbon guy. I don't care what's in it.
Yeah, it's not very complex.
No.
It's not.
And I like being taken on a journey when I taste these for the episodes, and this is pretty cookie cutter.
This to me is you get home, you want a good shot of bourbon or just something to sit there in front of the TV, here you go.
That's true. This might be something I would like. This is my issue, and I don't want to go too far off topic because we're almost 10 minutes into a bourbon discussion here, but that's what the listeners are here for. I have run into the issue recently with all of our maps are falling down that we have for these episodes. I've run into the issue recently where I'm at a dinner somewhere, and I get something to eat, a nice meal, and it's got its own flavors, and it's a certain entree. And I want a bourbon though. I want to pour something to go along with it. You know, nice water on the side, but then a nice pour of bourbon. But it's almost like I don't want to get something that is going to mess up because of what I'm eating or mess up what I'm eating because I'm drinking it. I would drink this because it's like, I know this is going to taste like this. It's not going to mess up my palate too much. Like, I don't taste this anymore after a couple sips. Like, this would be a good, you know, like you said, you get home, you have your dinner, and you want to pour bourbon and you're watching TV or something. I would drink this for that. Because sometimes when I'm at dinner, like when we're at a tasting or something, in the moment, it's all about the bourbon. Mm-hmm. You know, if I'm having a pour of whatever it is, you know, a nice top shelf or what have you, or something local, or
your palate's clean for that.
Yeah, it's clean. It's prepared for that. It's ready to experience the entire thing. And I feel like I would be doing the bourbon an injustice by eating my spaghetti with a pour of Buffalo Trace. Like,
yeah.
So this would be one I wouldn't mind having spaghetti with a pour of Jim Beam Black Label. Like,
yeah. You see, you're starting to get into that wine thing. What wine pairs with what, you know?
Yeah, and I can't think of bourbons that pair with foods really well. And like, that's why it's good to get a mixed drink every once in a while, like an old fashioned or something, because you know, you're not getting the bourbon, you're getting the drink that's based around the bourbon. So, yeah, I think that's something that's not often talked about in the bourbon world is, you know, bourbon pairings with other things. You know, bourbon in itself, I feel like if you have a good bourbon, is like its own meal, its own experience.
Yeah. Bourbon and chocolate is a good combo. Man. Yeah. Bourbon and dark chocolate, I would say.
It's very, because the chocolate's not really sweet, and the bourbon's got that kick to it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, orange dark chocolate, that's the way to go.
Wow.
Pair that with bourbon, yeah.
We'll have to do that for an episode. For like a Christmas episode, though. But go. Okay, well, that's our discussion there. With
Jim Beam Black.
Jim Beam Black. So, everyone, thumbs up, thumbs down. I don't know. Yeah. Aaron likes it. Elijah likes it.
For the price and the availability, I mean, it's if you want to go into a store and grab something that won't taste bad.
I like it with food, I would think. But I can't eat on the podcast. So.
It's a very easy bourbon to. It's
approachable.
Yeah.
And it's in a glass bottle, so you want to keep
Which makes it cool.
Yeah. Well, as we have our glasses full of Jim Beam Black Label.
Some of us did.
Extra aged or aged longer. What is it called?
Extra aged.
Extra aged. As we have our glasses full of that, let's get into our topic this episode. It is the impact and, of certain Confederate leaders on the Shenandoah Valley. The impact of their leadership, their actions, their choices, and the troops they command. Some of those will be Lee, Jackson, Mosby, and a little bit of Early. So this is a topic Aaron has researched, so we're glad to have Aaron on more as a guest in this episode to lead this conversation and dialogue and let us be a part of it and add any input we decide. But Aaron, if you want to start us off with Lee and kind of what his short term, I mean, as obviously has a major impact on the Civil War as a whole, but from us being our biased selves here in the Valley, we don't have too much Lee claim to fame. Certain areas like the northern Shenandoah Valley with Berryville and I think Charlestown maybe, Stanton and certain other areas. So what impact, if any, does Robert Edward Lee have on the Shenandoah Valley?
As a matter of fact, Robert E. Lee has a lot of impact on the Shenandoah Valley.
What's wrong?
Early in the Civil War, he's the military advisor later in 61 into 62. But in July, just after the Battle of Bull Run, July 29th of 1861, Lee is going to arrive in Stanton, Virginia, via the Virginia Central Railroad. And by July 31st, he's going to be moving westward along the Stanton-Parkersburg Turnpike. So he's going to go through some of our valley battlefields, McDowell out to Monterey.
Long before they've been christened with bloodshed.
Long before Jackson was there. But he's moving westward to take command of the Confederate forces in the mountains of Virginia, present-day West Virginia. While he's out there, he's going to remain there with those forces until October. And unfortunately, for Lee, He's going to have some personalities out there that don't get along. They're political generals, and they don't get along with each other, and they don't follow orders very well. And Lee, as we see later, some of his orders are kind of complex. He has some wonderful battle plans in the West, out in Western Virginia. They're just not executed. And ironically, he is facing George McClellan. So at these battles, the Battle of Cheat Mountain and so forth, Lee will lose those battles, which will actually elevate McClellan to fame, and will also later on in the war make McClellan feel like he's got Lee's number when it ends up being the other way around. By April, Lee is back in Richmond. He's part of the cabinet, so to speak. He's a military advisor. Mm-hmm. He's basically a general without a command. But he's going to be instrumental in our Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1862 with Stonewall Jackson. Honestly, without Robert E. Lee, you don't have the campaign that occurs, because Lee kind of thrust it into existence. Joseph Johnston, who's in command of the Confederate forces in Northern Virginia at the time, has told Jackson, he makes some diversions. The idea of keeping Union troops away from McClellan is still there, but he's not making a push. Don't bring on like these massive attacks or anything. Don't go invading anything. Just be there and keep them there. That's kind of what Johnson wants. But on April 21st of 1862, this is going to be before what a lot of historians would say is the official start of the Shenandoah Valley campaign. Again, I believe it started when Jackson got here in the Valley, 1861, November. But a lot of people will look at McDowell in May being the first major battle of that 1862 campaign. And then you'll have others that look at March 23rd, First Kernstown. But anyway, in April 21st, 1862, Lee is going to write Jackson and another man named Richard Ewell. He's going to encourage them to cooperate against General Nathaniel P. Banks in the Shenandoah Valley. Banks is in Winchester, and he is moving up the valley toward Stanton, while Jackson, at this point, has retreated just outside of Conrad's store and is in the Swift Run Gap. On the 25th of April, this is what, to me, shows how much Lee is thinking about the valley. Just a couple days later, April 25th, Lee again is going to write both of those generals, urging them forward as a way to relieve pressure being put on Johnston's army now around Richmond. McClellan has moved to the peninsula. Johnston's now moved down to Richmond to defend the city, and he's retreating up the peninsula. So Lee's seeing the importance of the Shenandoah Valley. He's been there before. He knows about the valley. And in this instance, he is laying the foundation for what we call the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1862, which is one of the greatest campaigns of war. It's studied all over the world, Jackson's Valley Campaign. That campaign, as I said, will kind of kick off, depending on who you want to talk to, but in a way it kicks off on May 8th, 1862. Rather than attack Banks, Jackson is going to write to Lee and say, I've got three options. I can attack Banks, I can come to the aid of Johnston, or I can go over the mountains and attack Fremont's forces, Robert H. Milroy. And Jackson prefers to go over and attack Milroy. Lee tells him, go for it. Do whatever you want to do. Now, my favorite part of this is that we have, correspondence with Lee, Jackson, and Ewell. Ewell is he's kind of in the middle. He can assist Jackson, but he's also supposed to watch the flank of Johnston's army, or the rear. Ewell will be pulled into Swift Run Gap, into those camps, and Jackson will march out. The problem with that is Jackson doesn't tell Ewell any more than I'm going into the mountains, and which makes Richard Ewell actually get his dander up and is very upset because Nathaniel P. Banks, who Lee had talked about attacking, is right there in front of him. When the battle in McDowell occurs on May 8th, 1862, Jackson will attack those outlying Union forces under Milroy, and he's going to win a great victory there, albeit it's a whole nother topic for another episode, but it's not necessarily a major victory, but they do win the field and are able to push Milroy back to Fremont, who is in Franklin, Virginia, now West Virginia. But this battle is a result of those communications from Robert E. Lee to Stonewall Jackson and Richard Ewell. When Jackson gets back in the valley, Ewell and Jackson will join forces, will fight at Front Royal, Winchester, just outside of Strasburg, Middletown, and they'll move on up to Martinsburg. There's even an instance where now things are starting to really get serious on the peninsula. Johnston's going to kind of start calling for Ewell, and Lee is going to intersect himself into it enough to say, not order it, but suggest that they continue their campaign, not necessarily ignore Johnston, but find a way to get Johnston to understand what's going on. There's even an account that there may have been some dates that were fudged just a little bit to make the correspondence look right. Although Jackson's a stickler for things, apparently you could stretch some stuff. And he and Ewell will do that in order for them to stay together, and it'll work out. They'll have this massive Valley campaign, and this will also elevate Richard Ewell, once Jackson dies, to command of the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia for a little while. So that's the early impact of Lee. And then, as you said, Jack, we've got Lee coming into the Valley. He realizes what the Valley is. It is an avenue of invasion. Not only that, it's a supply base. It's just a great avenue to do a lot of things. It's known as the breadbasket of the Confederacy, and it's going to provide food throughout the war to Lee's troops. This place is vitally important. By July of 1862, when Lee's in command of Northern Virginia, of the Army of Northern Virginia, that Shenandoah Valley campaign we're talking about becomes even more important to him, because now Jackson has done all these amazing things in the Valley, these big battles. Now he's taking that Valley commander and bringing him toward Richmond, and every day, no matter where, and nobody knows where Jackson's at this point, it seems Jackson could be here. He could be attacking Washington. He could be attacking North Carolina. He's attacking Richmond. No one really knows. And Lee uses that to play on the psyche of the opposing generals, and it'll play on the psyche of McClellan. With Lee seeing this later in 1863, he's going to use the Valley as invasion. Second Battle of Winchester on the Gettysburg Campaign. In 1864, he's going to try to do the same thing, albeit with a different general because Jackson is dead, but the same type of thing in the Shenandoah Valley. Lee just really understands that this valley is extremely important and is probably one of the best military terrains he has. So to say Lee doesn't have an impact on the valley, you're not going to have an 1862 Shenandoah Valley campaign without Robert E. Lee. He's the one that really he's instrumental in making it happen. He gets Ewell there. He gets Jackson kind of moving. Although Jackson didn't need a lot of pushing, but he gives enough forces to Jackson. He kind of sends some reinforcements up there. He's sneaking some stuff up to Jackson, and they're going to bypass Johnston, which will make Joseph Johnston upset. But he's going to be wounded later, so neither here nor there on that. But yeah, Lee, hugely impactful here in the Shenandoah Valley.
Which is interesting for someone who's only been physically in the valley twice. Was it Berryville before Gettysburg?
He was Berryville, Stanton,
Brucetown for his review, Stevenson's Depot.
Yeah, he Front Royal. Manassas Gap.
It's a handful of times.
Yeah, he's been a handful of times. But look at where does he go after the war? Lexington.
Yeah.
right down the street. Well, that's
Down
from
the
me
street.
in Newmarket, right down the street. From here, it's like 3 streets. But, he will settle in the Shenandoah Valley. It's just to me, just makes me think the valley is important to him, and he knows it.
And it's interesting to see it from kind of the most well-known general of the Civil War, especially the most well-known and important Confederate general during the war. When we do the parallel episode to this one with the Union command influence in the Shenandoah Valley, you'll see it with, his reflective enemy per se, and that's Grant. The same. We'll dive into that later, but it's interesting to see it, and you bring up some good points of Lee's understanding and application of the importance of the Shenandoah Valley.
Yeah. So that's Lee.
Yeah.
I think the next guy we got to move into is Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson.
Okay.
He has the best quote of the Civil War to me, because I'm biased to it.
We're all biased.
We're all biased to it. If the valley is lost, what's the rest of it, Jack?
Virginia is lost.
Virginia is lost. That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
But he's right.
He's right. What happens
Yeah.
after the valley's done? It's not long after
Yeah.
the Civil War ends in Virginia. Jackson is in the Shenandoah Valley. He's been in the military. He's now a professor at VMI, and he's going to go from teacher to Valley hero. Jackson's forces, when he gets here in November of 1861, again, like I said, late October, early November, he's going to get here, and he is not going to sit idle. He's already had some heroics at the Battle of Manassas. That's where he's getting that moniker Stonewall. Although he will say that belongs to the brigade, it follows him around. As I said, before the war, he's teaching in Lexington at the Virginia Military Institute. And when the war breaks out, Jackson will offer his services to the defense of Virginia, and he will immediately occupy Harper's Ferry in what is now West Virginia, but still in the Shenandoah Valley, or right on the edge of it. After his famous stand there at Manassas, where they earned Stonewall, he'll return to the valley, and he'll take command in late October 1861. And again, he won't sit idly. We had a previous episode. He's going to do a lot of campaigns. He's going to go up and attack Dam Number 5 on the C&O Canal. He realizes that is a supply base, and logistically, if he can take that and wound it, or keep it from moving for a little bit, that's a major thing against the federal forces in the area. And he will attack Dam Number 5, and he'll fail. It's not going to be really successful. I mean, yes, they'll do some damage, but within days, the Federal Army's got it running again. But even in that failure, Jackson has already shown that he is willing to move and to attack. In the early war, you got to remember, the Confederate thought process is defense. Defense, defense, defense. And while Lee and Jackson, not that they disagree with it, they will stretch it to a certain point. Jackson will defend the valley, yet he will attack. After Dam Number 5, we're going to have, we talked about earlier in one of the other episodes, the Bath-Romney campaign. Mm-hmm. Kind of another, not really a failure, but not a really successful campaign, so to speak, especially when we'll start to notice some of those things where Jackson doesn't get along with subordinates. But he's continuing to threaten forces in the Western Virginia region, and at the same time scaring the bejesus out of Abraham Lincoln and the federal government. I think he's actually scaring Edward Stanton more than anybody.
Yeah.
That guy's something. But anyway, he should be his own episode, just so you know. But Jackson's going to start using that hard, fast marching. That's going to make his troops famous here in the Shenandoah Valley. And when they go to other places, they're feared because they could end up anywhere. And all that starts here in the valley. and particularly with the Romney-Bath campaign, I said about his trait with subordinates. One of those traits will be where he doesn't get along. One of those people will be W.W. Loring. He will not get along with him. We'll see at Kernstown, Richard Garnett. He'll not get along with A.P. Hill. Several generals that he will not get along with. But Jackson understands what Lee wanted him to do, understands what Johnston wanted him to do. Use the valley as a diversion, as an alternate theater to keep federal forces at bay. And he's going to use it brilliantly. When he makes that attack at First Kernstown, he's attacking a larger force. Although he's got some false information when he does that, it again will alert the federal government. They're not going to send forces down to McClellan. They're going to keep them up there because now Jackson's threatening D.C., although he really isn't threatening D.C. Right. He doesn't have the force to be able to do that.
Well, the intent's not so much to make the valley the theater of war.
Yeah.
It's more so
secondary.
Yeah.
But I mean, like a diversion.
If you want to bring the war here, we can do that. Mm-hmm. However, that's not what we're looking to do.
Yeah.
And the Union gives it their full attention.
It's the back door to the Capitol.
It's
so
the back door to the Capitol.
If you leave a force unattended to or don't have an eye on it, you're leaving a guard down in a way.
Yeah.
So it forces the opposer to, in this case, the Federals, to have an attentive eye to the Shenandoah Valley and what's going on.
Respect the game plan.
Got to respect it. Respect it so much that 60,000 soldiers are going to be diverted away from McClellan, so to speak.
Which is crazy to think about because sitting here in Winchester, Richmond's a pretty far drive away from us. So it's like it's interesting to see that right here is part of why things got drawn our way instead of being focused on Richmond.
Exactly, and also with that amount of men, let's think about what Jackson has. He doesn't even have 20,000 men. And we're talking 60,000, and he's beating 3 different armies here in the valley. Now, granted, those generals may have not been up to par, so to speak, once you look at it. But and really, I think the best general he actually fights during the Valley campaign would be Robert H. Milroy, because he actually gives him a pretty good fight. You could throw Nathaniel Kimball in there. Or Nathan Kimball. You could throw him in there because he actually does beat Jackson. But Jackson, realizing his assignment is key. I mean, he makes the valley a threat with Lee being able to give him some forces and give him advice, and Jackson being able to take that and run with it. It makes the Shenandoah Valley an extremely volatile place for the Federal Army. It becomes a hard road to travel, so to speak.
It'll create the Jackson. Stonewall, obviously, the name is forged and, no pun intended, laid as a stone wall at Manassas, a Bull Run. But this lore, this idea, this fame of Jackson really takes form here in the Shenandoah Valley with what he can do here. I mean, I think we talked about it in I think it was the Bath Romney episode, or the Civil War Winchester episode. This lore with them, parents would say, if you don't, go to bed on time, or if you're not asleep, Stonewall Jackson's going to come and get you. That lore to him, as well as the fear that the African American communities of the Valley had because of what they had heard of Jackson's men doing, in turn what Jackson was doing. So it was a truly feared man, whether it was for parenting purposes or life and death purposes. Jackson, this figure, this mythical creature that is Stonewall Jackson, truly took shape here because of what took place here in the Shenandoah Valley.
Yeah. It's amazing how much his fame rose. He became the premier Southern general before Lee, really takes off.
Yeah.
And then you get that partnership: Lee, Longstreet, Jackson, Stewart. Those 4 guys they beat the tar out of the Union Army for a couple of years.
Running the show.
They run the show and then, unfortunately for the Confederates, Jackson dies, Stuart will get killed. Things will just kind of unravel as the rest of the generals, while not bad generals, are just not up to that caliber. So I think it says something about Jackson being able to use the Shenandoah Valley and his impact here really is the start of his impact in the war as a whole. Manassas kind of becomes its own individual thing because the Valley is his big accomplishment. Yeah. And like I said, nobody in 1862, when Jackson leaves the Valley, they don't know if he's still in the Valley. They don't know if he's left, where he's going. Is he attacking Washington? Is he going to North Carolina? Is he going to come in on McClellan's rear? Unfortunately for the Confederates, Jackson will, I think, be fatigued and also not knowing the country as well, not being able to move quite as fast as he does in the Valley. But once he gets his legs under him after this 7 days campaign, look at him go. Cedar Mountain, 2nd Manassas, Antietam. He'll go to Harper's Ferry, and then
Harper's Ferry, then Antietam.
Next thing you know, he's got the light division under A.P. Hill is saving the day at Antietam, and that's under Jackson. And then you go to Fredericksburg, and where the Union Army could have, we talked about it, where the Union Army could have won that battle. Guess who's there? Stonewall Jackson. And poor John Pope, I guarantee you, if you dug him up today and he could talk to you, and you said Stonewall Jackson, he probably just want to be buried again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Lee and Jackson, those two by themselves make the 1862 Shenandoah Valley extremely important, even as a secondary theater. It's what opens up that secondary theater. It takes a lot of eyes away from what's happening at Richmond, and it slows down McClellan too. Even though he's not necessarily going to admit it, you've got to know he's worried about Jackson coming out of nowhere and hitting him, and with the amount of troops he thinks Lee already has, it's an amazing little thing. What a few victories can really do for you.
Well, it's interesting too because the whole purpose of the Federals and their focus on Virginia is Richmond.
Yeah,
they want to take Richmond, but yet for whatever reason, the Shenandoah Valley almost becomes just as, if not more important than that movement on Richmond itself. It just becomes one of those secondary objectives that I don't know, that it almost gets under the skin of the Union command. That it's why can't we just
Why can't we do this?
Why can't we just take this? Because, like you said, 60,000 Union troops compared to Jackson's 20,000. At that point, they're probably getting a little irritated with the fact that we can't just, sweep this, move on to Richmond, get it over with. They have to keep, backtracking or sidetracking to get the Valley under control, or at least try to, before they can even focus on Richmond. And that just shows that Jackson's tactics are working. But it's interesting to see that the Valley's getting more attention in a sense than Richmond got when Richmond was the goal to begin with.
Yeah. So that's pretty much Stonewall Jackson in a nutshell here in the Valley. The next guy, before I move on to Mosby, because I love me some Mosby, man. Mm-hmm. That's like my favorite guy in the Civil War. Jubal Early.
Yeah.
Now, Early, that's before we even get to Early. Let's talk about Richard Ewell just a little bit.
Yeah.
He has a small impact here in the Shenandoah Valley, really, in 63. But in 62, he is with Jackson. That's another very good general at the time. After he's wounded at 2nd Manassas, he changes a little bit. But at the Battle of Cross Keys, second to last battle of the Valley campaign, Jackson's not even on the field. We talked about this in the episode, when the episode we did. I don't remember which one that was. 5, 4, 6, somewhere around there. It was an earlier episode. Jackson he trusts Ewell. Now, to say that Jackson trusts a general enough to make dispositions and him not even be on the field, that's saying something. Because that's exactly what it is. Now, he's got simple orders. Ewell's got some very simple orders: defend this area, protect my rear, and then come to Port Republic. But the fact that Jackson didn't feel he needed to go all the way there to check the dispositions, he talks to a staff officer and
Didn't
says,
have to babysit him.
yeah, very good, very good. And back to Port Republic he goes. He's got troubles of his own down there.
Yeah.
But that, Richard Ewell, that will elevate Ewell, that when Jackson is ultimately killed after Chancellorsville, we talked about he dies of pneumonia, that ultimately Ewell will be elevated to that Second Corps command. The troops know him. He's marched with them. He's been, and I find it ironic, before that at the Battle of Port Republic, he shows up with the Louisiana Tigers when they're about to attack the Coaling for the last time. He says, the first thing he says is, "Men, you know me." Now that says something. These guys, suddenly they're attentive. He doesn't even give them the order at Port Republic. They just charge up the mountain after that, and they go take the guns, and the battle's won. There's a instance about Ewell at one point's going to come out in pajamas in the middle of a street and start shooting at people. And this is before Second Manassas. And while he's shooting, he's cussing, and but he's in his night clothes. He's kind of a bad dude at that point. Once he gets wounded and gets married, it's very amazing how much he actually changes. He finds some religion and things like that. He still fights, and he fights well, but he becomes extremely cautious. But we'll see him again in the Shenandoah Valley in 1863. That Second Battle of Winchester, he is going to win a major victory for the Confederate Army.
With the help of Ewell.
With the help of Early.
Excuse me.
And not Albert City Johnson, my goodness. Edward Allegheny Johnson. He's gonna win a major victory there. And that's gonna endear those troops to him for a little while. Obviously we know
Till about early July.
Yeah, about a month later. We know at Gettysburg he has a bunch of missteps. He does win a victory technically on the first day. It is a Confederate victory on the first day because they push them out. But
Second Winchester, I mean, it's smart, it's cool, it's calculated. It's a
beautiful battle.
It's a beautiful battle, and Ewell, because of what happens at Gettysburg, often doesn't get a light shine on him for 63 engagements.
Yeah.
But his leadership and directive at Second Winchester should not be overlooked, and his impact there will obviously teach the gentleman we're going to talk about now, Jubal Early.
Yes.
Where he'll learn a lot of things, and he'll learn them from regimental command at the beginning of the war. But what gets us to 1864 and his command of this Army of the Valley, which will become the Army of the Valley, learns a lot of lessons because he knows this ground and because he knows what it takes to win battles.
Yes, he's been here. Like you said, he knows what it takes to win battles. So Early. Ewell is Ewell takes himself out of commission. He doesn't feel his health is up to it, and he's probably right. I also think that's kind of an easy way out for him.
Yeah.
It's a little more distinguished. It's not, I'm a bad general, I'm going to leave, because really he wasn't a terrible general, but he's got that stigma from Gettysburg. So they're going to give command to that rascally old devil, Jubal Early, who's got rheumatism. He's stooped over. He's grumpy all the time. He's never been married.
West Point grad.
West Point grad, was against secession at the beginning of the war. Was a lawyer, I believe. He is, and he's a heck of a fighter. He will come into command of the Second Corps of the Army in Northern Virginia, which will, again, go back into the Shenandoah Valley. And his first instance back in the Valley in 1864 is down at the Battle of Lynchburg, which he will win, just outside the Valley, really. But he will get there, and he will he'll start out with a ruse of bringing trains in all night and having the crowd, the townspeople, yoo-hoo, yell and stuff that these troops are coming in. Nobody's coming. He's just making the trains go back and forth to deceive the Union soldiers that are on the other side, and it works. So much so that after that battle, that particular Union commander will take his army out of the war for a month, which opens up the Shenandoah Valley. At that point, Lee is going to tell Early, make a diversion in the valley. And that's exactly what Early will do. He will go down the valley all the way to Winchester, cross the Potomac River up at Harper's Ferry. He's going to go all the way out. He'll fight a battle at Monocacy in Maryland.
If Fort's
Monocacy's first. Lew Wallace will be fighting him there. It's called the Battle That Saves Washington because it does enable Grant to get the 6th Corps and some other units up to D.C. and into those forts as he had kind of stripped them in 1864 for his overland campaign. But Early's going to get up there and he's going to fight this battle. He's going to win the Battle of Monocacy, even though it reminds me of McDowell. It's a delaying action. Confederate victory, but with a lot of implications that are good for the Union. But then he will get to the outskirts of D.C. And, I don't want to play the what-if game, but we never see Jackson get to do that in 1862. Mm-hmm. What happens if he does? That's just a question you have to think maybe what would have happened. But Early will get there, and he will press, and his thought process is to fight and take D.C. I mean, he's there. But he's going to go against, he's going to say, you know what? He's going to see these troops coming in. The heavies are coming in. 6th Corps is coming in. Had he attacked right away, he may have been able to take the city, but could he hold the city? Probably not. So he's going to retreat back into the Shenandoah Valley, fighting a battle at Cool Spring. We'll have the second battle of Kernstown. Some Confederate victories going on there. And then it's going to be kind of a lull here in the Shenandoah Valley. As things shift, you have the overland campaign. Grant is pushing Lee all the way to Richmond. He's going to finally get Lee in those entrenchments. And, the valley is going to become more important again. Lee is going to try to do the same strategy he did in 1862. He's going to have Early make that diversion. Unfortunately for Early, he's going to face a larger force and a well-commanded force here in the valley in August of 1864. Almost said 62. 1864, and we'll know, the battles of the Third Battle of Winchester, the Battle of Fisher's Hill are basically going to knock him out of commission for a little while, as he's going to be reeling from heavy casualties and a Union juggernaut that's coming here into the valley. Mm-hmm. And it's because of 1862, well, really 1861, 1862, 1863, we've used the valley. Now we're in 1864. We just invaded all the way up to Washington, right? If we're the Confederates. General Ulysses S. Grant's finally going to say, enough's enough.
Yeah.
And he's going to they're going to burn the Shenandoah Valley.
Leave the valley a barren waste.
A barren waste that a bird has to carry its food with it, It won't even be able to land anywhere. And that's what will happen.
That's what Early's got to deal with.
And Early's got to deal with that. And on top of it, he's losing these major battles. And there's only so much he can do. He's vastly outnumbered. And I find it ironic. Jackson, in 60, he's a master of flank attacks. We see it at Chancellorsville, even though he dies as a result of getting shot and pneumonia. It's a flank attack. Look at what Sheridan does in the Shenandoah Valley in 1864. He's the opposite. He's the Union Stonewall Jackson in that. Flank attack after flank attack.
Yeah.
And it works. It works. The valley becomes so important that it has to be destroyed in order for the Union Army to win the Civil War. Here's the other thing. Yes, the fall of Atlanta is a major issue. That's a major thing for the election of Abraham Lincoln. The Shenandoah Valley is just as important in 1864. Without the defeat here in the Shenandoah Valley, without 1864, without defeating Early here, Lincoln's not going to get reelected. Yeah. I don't care what happened in Atlanta. This is in your backyard. Mm-hmm. They've already come up to the gates of Washington. The first president under fire as president has been Abraham Lincoln. He was on the parapets of Fort Stevens. you can't win an election with that kind of force at you knocking at the back door. So they've got to be taken out. So Atlanta coupled with the Valley is what wins Abraham Lincoln the election. I mean, it's just, I'll throw it out there and challenge anybody on that one. But Jubal Early, he'll make another attack in October of 1864, October 19th, Battle of Cedar Creek, massive attack. Looks like a significant Confederate victory. Ends up as a Confederate loss because his troops are hungry, they're tired, and he thinks he's got them beaten, and he takes that fatal stop that we know about for 2 hours at Cedar Creek. And then he will eventually lose in 1865 at the Battle of Waynesboro.
The last major battle.
Battle of the Shenandoah. But look, we've had battles in the Shenandoah from 61 to 65. We've had activity here. This valley is extremely important to the Confederates and the Union Army, but to the Confederates especially. It's a
326 skirmishes, engagements, and battles. I think it's one every 4 days.
Yeah.
Fought in the valley. So that just tells you a little bit of something.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Whenever you think, oh my God, Jack and Elijah and Aaron talk too much about the valley, it's like
we're only talking about a fraction of what actually went
down. It's like this was important. And that's the whole point of, of it too, is we want to shine a light on other topics, but especially stuff here in the valley. So early is kind of like the bookend in a way to Confederate leadership's influence on what happens here in the valley. So that's early, but let's talk about one more before we close out. Your favorite, Aaron.
My favorite. The gray ghost of the Confederacy, John Singleton Mosby, Colonel John Singleton Mosby, 43rd Battalion. I just love this guy.
Partisan Rangers?
Partisan Rangers. One of the few units that were christened as that, and basically under Confederate service. Sheridan will look at them as bushwhackers, but they are under military service. The reason Sheridan will look at that is Mosby's really going to have his impact on the Valley in 1864. He is going to, he is going to be a nuisance in the Union rear the entire time of 1864. It does not start with Sheridan. It starts with Franz Sigel at the Battle of Neumarkt. He is going to relentlessly attack Sigel's supply, and just Sigel's not going to know what to do. He's going to send his cavalry all over the place. They'll go up to Moorfield and fight a battle, and he'll send them out looking for Mosby, and he can't find them because Mosby's men would just disappear. But as I said, he's a major nuisance here in the Shenandoah Valley. He not only harassed the Union supply trains, he is going to occupy the attention of the Federal cavalry units that are actually meant to be not only the eyes of the Army as they're moving in hostile territory, but also protection for the supplies. Those guys are going to be pulling away, and he might have a squadron over here. Next thing you know, Mosby's over here. We've got several different raids that happen where he's going to capture all kinds of material. Near Front Row in September of 1864, several of Mosby's men will be captured and hung at a place known as Guard Hill. There's going to be placards bearing the inscription, "Hung in retaliation for Union officers killed after he had had surrendered, the fate of Mosby's men." Now, Mosby's going to retaliate to that by hanging men from the commands of Custer and Powell along the Valley Pike. And
with his death lottery.
Yeah, and he has a death lottery, and actually there's one instance where it's drawn, it's like a young boy, he's like a drummer boy, and Mosby has him redraw again, so he doesn't have to kill the kid. So, there's still that. But it's the intenseness, how many other times do we hear about a major Union army worrying about a little partisan command?
Yeah, just to show that in perspective, at some point, I think it's in September of 64, Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant will tell Major General, Commander of the Army of the Shenandoah, Philip Sheridan, he'll write him in a letter saying, "The families of most of Mosby's men are known and can be collected. I think they should be taken and kept at Fort McHenry or someplace secure, some secure place as hostages for good conduct of Mosby and his men. With any of them when any of them are caught with nothing to designate what they are, hang them without trial.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that tells you the guy that's in charge of everything, the field commander of all Union forces, is writing to Sheridan about this one guy and a couple hundred men in the mountains of Virginia.
This one little dude, and I mean little, who was a lawyer, got kicked out of UVA for killing somebody, is a scrappy little guy, is a major thorn in the Union Army's side. Not just in the valley, but in the Loudon Valley as well.
What do they call it? Mosby's Confederacy.
Mosby's Confederacy. Even after those major defeats at Third Battle of Winchester, Fisher's Hill, Cedar Creek, the Woodstock races, all that stuff that happens, Tom's Brook, Mosby is still very active, and he is still harassing Phil Sheridan's army. Even during the burning, Mosby is harassing Sheridan's army as much as he can, so much so that Sheridan will take, I believe it's the 5th New York Cavalry, and basically send them after Mosby. He's like, that's your job, because he is just such a freaking thorn in their side.
And this is a guy with basically the equivalent of a regiment.
Yeah.
In strength. He doesn't have an army. He's not leading an army against anybody. He's just his own regiment, just kind of doing his own thing. And you've got the attention of everybody in the Union.
Yeah, he's got the whole attention of everybody. One of my favorite raids that he does is the Greenback Raid. It's kind of on the edge of the valley. It's there in West Virginia. But during the 1864 Valley Campaign, Mosby and his men attack a train near modern-day West Virginia, attacking engine number 27, which is headed to Baltimore. Mosby's men had pulled up the tracks and took possession of the train. On the train were 2 federal paymasters carrying $172,000. This attack became known as the Greenback Raid, and it was just another in a long list of frustrations for the Union command in the Shenandoah Valley. There's actually another instance where they will capture, actually I think it's Berryville. They'll capture more money, but they don't know it. They'll burn the money. But, speaking of Berryville, it's near there that Mosby's men will disband.
Yeah, because of the federal forces under.
I think it's
who's in command here?
Is it Hancock at that point?
Yeah, Hancock's federal command here in Winchester. It's like April of '65. They're trying to figure out. All right, they've got these soldiers paroling from Appomattox. How's everything going to be handled? And the big one was like, how do we handle Mosby's men? It's like unconditional surrender, all these things, and. Mosby's just got a way about him. He just it all just works out, He his brother goes to talk with them instead of him. It's like very interesting, and there's tons of research on Mosby, and I'd love to do a Mosby only episode. Jeff Wirtz written a book about Mosby. Dr. Carolyn Janey, the director of the now Center for Civil War Studies at University of Virginia. She's writing a book on Mosby.
You've got Eric Buckland, who's wrote a ton of books
on Mosby. And his Rangers, too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Mosby stuff. So he definitely is deserving of his own episode. He's just this figure that's often, fantasized and talked about a lot, just like Jackson, too.
I would just like to be here for the episode. I don't even have to talk. I just want to be here in the room when that comes.
Yeah. But he has a major influence. The fear, we talked about the fear of Jackson and other Confederates, not only on mostly on the civilians too, but the fear that Mosby had on Federals. I mean, it must have been frightening. This gray ghost, his name was, and the effect he had on Federal forces, being able to slip in and out of the mountains at weird times and come raid your camp or something.
Although it doesn't happen in the valley, Fairfax. He goes into Fairfax and kidnaps a freaking general out of his bed.
Yeah,
slaps him on the rear end with the flat side of a sword and gets him out of bed. Never fires a shot. And one of my favorite Lincoln quotes is that they asked Lincoln about it, and he says, I could make a major general at the stroke of a pen, but the horses, they're like $120 a pop, and it was like 70 horses or something, 100 horses or whatever. And he's Lincoln's making a joke about it, but he's right. He could make him any major general. To replace those horses is a lot, a lot of money and a lot of time, because we forget the animals are dying just as much as the men.
Yeah.
When his capture there at Fairfax, where he slaps the general on the ass and gives him the
Charles Stoughton.
He says, "Have you heard of Mosby?" And he goes, "Why, yes." "Have you captured him?" And he goes, "No, he's captured you."
He's captured you.
Yeah. I mean, that
Great Aaron Savor travels video on that.
I haven't heard of that one.
You could make a movie out of that.
Oh, my
I mean,
gosh,
that's
yeah.
just like...
Mosby could have his own movie, yeah.
That would be...
And he's a beast, too, because his post-war life is pretty
Oh, my
incredible.
gosh.
He's like the ambassador to
He goes
Hong
to Hong Kong
or
yeah.
something. He's
And
a lawyer.
you look, he's a friend to Ulysses S. Grant. Now, Longstreet is too. You look at James Longstreet gets kind of hammered for that.
But they were before
No.
the war, too, were they not?
Little. Longstreet and Grant, yes.
Yes.
Mosby and
But
Grant, not
Mosby-
so much. No.
So, yeah,
But I mean, these two guys, they're both major Confederates, and they both are friends of who becomes president of the United States. One gets ridiculed for it. The other one's like, well, it's Mosby.
you
like
can't
you
hold
said.
it against him.
Yeah, he has a way about him. Dude lives to what, like 1914 or something
Yeah,
like
he's
that?
out of all the Confederate leaders we talked about that had an influence on the Valley. He lives to be 82 and dies in 1916
1916.
in D.C. and he's buried in Warrenton. So he's the longest
Yes.
living guy out of all the ones we talked about. Interesting fellow, and all these guys truly have interesting lives. Early after the war, his influence, especially with the Lost Cause narrative, and then Ewell doesn't live too long after the war,
No.
and Lee either, but his legacy with like the university in Lexington,
Washington
things like
Lee
that.
University, yeah.
But their impact on the Valley is often overlooked. I mean, not Jackson, but all these other ones we've talked about. And, it's interesting to see their thought process, their leadership, their understanding, the lessons they've learned, things like that, and how it made the Shenandoah Valley a different place for the next person and the next one. So we'll definitely have a sequel in a way to this episode to go in tandem in the future to talk about federal or Union leadership and their effects in the Shenandoah Valley. But we want to thank Aaron for coming on for this episode and diving into a topic he's researched a good bit about. So we thank him for always coming on and being a guest of the podcast and a co-host at times. So
He lives here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. I mean, I got to say this, guys. How cool is it that we get to sit down, drink bourbon, and talk about the Civil War?
It's pretty cool.
Can't
I
beat it.
mean,
And there's a couple people that listen, which is pretty cool, too.
and I'm willing to drive from Newmarket up here for a couple hours
the occasion.
just to do that.
Yeah.
Not because I like you guys. It's because I like bourbon and I like the
Exactly.
Civil War.
There you
You
go.
guys are okay.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for listening. If you want to support us in any way, just like and share the podcast. Also, if you're interested in supporting us even more with monetary funds, feel free to become a member of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, they're the managing body of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District. Stay tuned for a lot of events in 2024 by them, and you have no problem staying tuned if you become a member. So just become a member, and if you do, there should be, if you go online to shenandoahatwar.org and ways to give, and there should be a membership. Become a member. $35 is the lowest membership. And put in the little note section there that you became a member because of the podcast. That helps us with our support and being able to do more for you all. So that's just another way you can get involved with us. And we just appreciate you all listening and sharing and liking the podcast. And we'll catch you on the next one. Anything else, Elijah?
Nope. Just give us the 5 stars on Spotify or Apple if you liked
Yeah.
it, and let us know if you didn't.
Yeah. Let us know privately, please. Thank you all so much, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, guys.